The exhibition Octopus 21 on Fire features the work of 10 contemporary Queensland artists: Gordon Bennett, Warraba Weatherall, Jemima Wyman, Mavis Nalameta, Dale Harding, Judy Watson, Madonna Staunton, Naomi Blacklock, Michael Candy, and Tracy Moffat. The show considers themes of climate change and climate precarity and how that kind of comes across in the work of contemporary Queensland practitioners. My name's Tim Riley Walsh and I'm the Curator in Residence here at Gertrude, Australia's leading incubator of contemporary art. This exhibition, Octopus 21 on Fire, is part of the Octopus series of shows that have been going since 2000. It's the 21st iteration. The really great thing about Octopus is that it's a celebration of changes and developments in exhibition making and celebrating curatorial innovation. So it's a real pleasure to be contributing a show as part of that. This current iteration of Octopus, number 21, entitled On Fire, is looking at the work of contemporary Queensland artists, and it began as part of an invitation from the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane to profile the work of Queensland practitioners and to think about what makes Queensland art unique or special. And part of my thinking at the time was framed by the severity of kind of climate change and its kind of increasing impact on the environment that we live in, and was really informed by significant kind of changes and developments in late 2019 in local kind of biomes around Queensland, and wondering about how that's influencing artistic production. So the process of commissioning works as part of a show like this is a really joyous one, and it's a total pleasure as a curator to work with artists that you know and trust. And so the genesis of the show was really one that emerged from a number of conversations with some of the exhibiting artists. Dale Harding and Judy Watson were particularly informative, and conversations with them around the influence of cultural fire knowledge and First Nations cultural fire knowledge for an understanding of fire and its place in this country were central to the framing of the show. So often when we think about fire in this country, we think about it as an unnatural presence, and certainly from an introduced settler colonial perspective, fire is something which should be suppressed, when in fact, from a cultural burning perspective, fire has a very necessary and rejuvenating role in the environment. And so conversations with Judy and Dale as part of the development of the show were incredibly informative for the framing of the exhibition concept, but also the commissioning of new works as well. Dale Harding's work, Moreton Bay Ash Smouldering Slowly, is an articulation of cultural burning, cultural fire knowledge, and the very central importance that fire has to First Nations cultures in this country. The work is a very intimate portrait of fire and its presence within a piece of Moreton Bay ash. There's a sense of kind of close and intimate proximity to this element, and a sense of its really kind of innate and natural presence within flora in Australia. And the amazing thing about Moreton Bay ash is that it burns so slowly and so carefully that often pieces of Moreton Bay ash could be picked up while lit and carried across country to light new fires. Warraba Weatherall's work is entitled To Know and Possess, and this work is an articulation of processes of acquisition and control and possession by settler colonial societies. And Warraba's work is part of an ongoing research project by the artist, which is conducting an investigation into Kamilaroi cultural objects that are living within cultural institutions and their collections. And for Warraba, there was this interest in looking at how when objects enter collections, once they're possessed by collections, that they are not within communities and they're not living active lives of sort of influence and education as part of First Nations communities. So for him, the archive, in a sense, articulates the sort of death of these cultural objects. Conversations with artists are always such a central part of the development of a new show, and especially one that focuses on newly commissioned works. And so definitely discussions that I had with artists, especially artists like Jemima Wyman, were really informative. And Jemima's work as part of the show is entitled Haze, and its full title actually runs to around 5 pages in length. And that's because the work is a sort of photographic documentation of protest across the world, and not just protest about the environment, but about inequality, democracy, or lack thereof. And Jemima's practice is one that uses photographs of these protests that she prints out, cuts out by hand, and then recomposes as photo collages. So the work that you can see in the exhibition is a combination of all of these plumes of smoke from various protests across the world. Black Lives Matter protests, Extinction Rebellion protests, pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. But the visual effect for the audience is this sense of a smoke front that's rising from the environment, perhaps, because the artist has chosen to print the work onto really beautiful and quite delicate chiffon. So it has a sense of kind of translucency to it. And certainly this interest in acknowledging the political impacts of climate change was a really central one to my understanding of the show's concept. Where previous projects have considered how subtropic and tropic conditions influence creative production, with this show I really wanted to think about how climate crisis was influencing artistic thinking and new ways of artistic thinking. So it felt like there was a real pertinent need to survey this shift in artistic production. In the past, there's been sort of this interest in sort of celebrating the heat, the humidity, the sweat of Queensland and its influence on Queensland art. But here it felt like something had shifted, and I was curious to see what that meant for art making in that state. Visual culture plays a really vital role in helping us comprehend change. I think in moments when the planet is shifting in dramatic ways, or we might feel a sense of disconnection from the environment and the world around us, visual culture allows us to perceive confusing times or experiences and articulates it in ways that is maybe palatable or more easily understood. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, and I think visual culture's capacity and power is really translating experiences of maybe planetary dysphoria or confusion and disconnection, and help us to understand a little bit more what it means to be living in a moment of climate crisis. Michael Candy's work, Azimuth, is positioned in the Gertrude window for a reason, and that's because at this present moment, the prevalence of COVID-19, the pandemic, has really kind of captured people's attention. Is obviously something which is influencing our lives in a myriad of ways. And it's not something that's disconnected from climate crisis. I think it might be easy to sort of see this work and think that this is a separate issue, but the United Nations and the World Health Organization has released a great deal of information and research that connects habitat destruction with the emergence of COVID-19. So we can't separate climate change and global warming and its influence on the pandemic and the rise of the pandemic. So being able to kind of foreground that in the exhibition and also present that to the public outside of exhibition hours, especially when the show might be closed. So at night that might mean that you're wandering past and you can see Michael's fantastic sculpture rotating in the gallery space by itself. And obviously the materials that it's made up of, UVC bulbs, have a sort of a sanitizing effect. And so this thought that this robot kind of cleansing the gallery space in our absence is kind of a curious and slightly humorous response to the present moment. I think the real joy of bringing a show like this to Melbourne and to the context of Gertrude is that it is so bravely and openly advocating for the seriousness and importance of contemporary Queensland art, and an opportunity to kind of profile that down south is something that doesn't happen so often. And I think the amazing thing about Melbourne is its celebration and its advocacy for its artists and the work that comes out of this place. But I think a part of the sort of necessity of understanding Australia as a country and as a cultural place is a recognition of what's happening across the border in other states, how that might be different, how we can learn from different practices, and how that might inform, changes in practices down here or even collaborations. So it's really exciting for me to be able to bring those voices down and to introduce different works and different approaches to a Melbourne audience. So in these moments when climate crisis is increasing, we feel this sense of being overwhelmed by the world and the influence that global warming has on the weather. And the scale of these things can often seem beyond our perception and beyond the range of our sort of senses. And art's capacity to kind of translate these experiences into kind of perhaps ways that fit within our sensory capacity is a powerful thing. But also art's capacity for affective connection, for generating feeling, for generating emotion, is another way for us to enter into what are often quite overwhelming situations. And I think when we think about global warming, so often our engagement as a society is through data, and data and scientific information can be a very cold mechanism for understanding the world around us. It tells us quite precisely what's going on and the truth of what's going on, but it's not often the best way for the public to kind of engage with changes to our environments. So art's role is a way to really describe the world and the shifts in the environment in a way that allows us to kind of engage with it in a deeper way and for then it to have an impact on the way we live and act.